By now, everyone has heard of the depraved actions of Jeffrey Epstein and his videos against many of the elite of the world, including presidents and royalty. And most recently, Sean Combs, also known as Diddy, is bringing down many in both the music industry and Hollywood. But have we really gotten to the bottom of these enterprises? Human trafficking is reprehensible, and nobody should ever have to endure such abuse. But all we have heard about so far is primarily with adult or underage teen trafficking. Does anyone really believe that it stops there? What about even more vulnerable targets? Yes, there is definitely a market for very young innocents. Cases have surfaced, but they never seem to be prosecuted for some reason. We are going to look at a couple of notable cases dealing with organized trafficking of children. Before we proceed, please check out my channel. Share my videos with friends and family who are beginning to awaken, and subscribe and tell me your thoughts. Now let's get into this disgusting but necessary topic to discuss. One of the most highly publicized cases was the McMartin preschool case, a family-run daycare center operated by Virginia McMartin and her family in Manhattan Beach, California in the 1980s and early 1990s. The school was just 20 miles southwest of downtown Los Angeles, so it was close to the rich and famous. We aren't going to delve into this one just yet, but I bring it up because Ted Gunderson, a former special agent in charge over the LA FBI office, was a private investigator employed by the defense in the McMartin school case to undermine the prosecution's case. But nobody could have ever dreamed what his findings would be. Ted Gunderson claims that there were underground tunnels connecting the school to various locations where it appeared that satanic ritual abuse had occurred, including locations associated with child abuse and exploitation involving high-profile individuals and institutions. The case that we are going to dive a little deeper into today is the case of the Finders, which occurred around the same time on February 5, 1987, when police in Tallahassee, Florida, arrested two well-dressed men in suits, Douglas Ammerman and James Michael Holwell, on suspicion of child abuse. These two men were in possession of drugs and 6 very dirty young children. The following information is available on the FBI vault at vault.fbi.gov, although they have been highly redacted. The two men arrested stated that they had no blood relation to the children and that they were en route to Mexico to start a school for brilliant children. But the children were dirty, hungry, covered in insect bites, and most were not wearing underwear. The children, ranging from 2 to 11 years old, said they didn't know where they were going, that they were being weaned from their mothers, that they were rarely indoors, even to sleep, and that they were rewarded with food. A medical examination of the children revealed bite marks on them from an adult-sized mouth, sexual abuse, and malnutrition. One of the Tallahassee witnesses interviewed had seen the children in the woods naked. Chapter 4. The FBI enters the case. The FBI got involved 2 days after the Tallahassee arrests on February 7th and directed that there be no more disclosure to the media about the case, despite the fact that their investigation was based on kidnapping. FBI offices in Washington, Alexandria, Baltimore, Richmond, Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, Louisville, New York, Miami, and Indianapolis were all notified immediately. A confidential police source previously told authorities that the Finders were a cult and that they used a duplex in Glover Park and the warehouse near the White House to conduct brainwashing, but it was apparently not investigated at the time. The Finders recruited the CI and promised financial rewards and sexual gratification. They also invited him to explore Satanism. 3 warrants were executed, one at the warehouse located at 1701 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C. Does that sound familiar to anyone? It should. The White House address is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. They are 1 mile apart by car travel, but only about a quarter of a mile as the crow flies if there were an alternate route such as the underground DC tunnels. The second warrant was for the duplex in Glover Park, which is known as the Hidden Embassy Row of DC. There are 8 countries who have embassies here: Russia, China, Switzerland, Afghanistan, Serbia, Panama, Burundi, and Chile. So now this alleged cult has a warehouse very close to the White House and now a duplex amidst embassies for several very controversial countries. One detective made notes of seized documents containing detailed instructions about ways to obtain children for various purposes, including impregnation, purchasing, trading, and kidnapping the children. Later, the documents couldn't be located, nor could a witness with knowledge of them. The children identified the 2 property locations in D.C. and said that they had been to the locations, and they were owned by a Mr. Marion Petty, and said that he was the game caller when they went to the warehouse to play games. It's interesting that the FBI documents redact every name of every other person involved, including the arrested suspects, but they didn't white out Petty's name. The last warrant was executed at a 90-acre farm in rural Madison County, Virginia, strategically located to multiple government buildings like DARPA, the Department of Defense, CIA headquarters, the Federal Reserve, and the Library of Congress, to name a few. The agents recorded cages on the premises and interviewed witnesses stating that children were brought in vans crying and the cages were used to keep the children in. Chapter 5. Nothing is going on here. Robert Gardner Terrell owned one of the DC properties and had a talk with the FBI. Terrell said that he was recently elected leader of the group when Marion Petty, a former Air Force Master Sergeant who rubbed elbows with the elite intelligence communities, resigned. Terrell also put together a press conference with members of the Finders cult, seeking to rehabilitate their tarnished reputation from the whole incident. 6 weeks later, all charges were dropped against the two men in suits that were arrested and they were released. The FBI closed their case, stating that they did not find evidence to support charges of child abuse or trafficking. The children were eventually returned to their families or guardians, so it doesn't matter that the children were abused and starving. If you are part of a cult community, you are somehow immune? It just makes no sense, so we have to dig just a little deeper. Members of the Finders were well-educated and affluent. A couple of members included Stuart Silverstone, who was found by police living at the residence in 1987. Silverstone was a faculty member at MIT in 1968. Other members, like John Cox, founded companies like General Scientific, which handled classified defense contracts. Many of the Finders were involved in either government or military work at various points in their lives. These kinds of cover-ups have been going on and have been suppressed for many years. The people know but are silenced if they questioned it, so there was not enough evidence to prosecute the Finders. Epstein commits suicide in jail, and none of the evidence from his properties ever sees the light in the courtroom. Not enough evidence to prosecute Hillary Clinton, in spite of her destroying evidence after receiving a subpoena. Podesta got nothing. Who gets prosecuted and destroyed in the U.S.? People trying to expose the Washington corruption do. Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Steve Bannon, General Flynn, Sidney Powell, Seth Rich, and Donald J. Trump, who promised to clean up the D.C. swamp. These are just a few of the people who are giving up everything for our freedom. So keep your eyes and ears open, because this horror show is just starting to be revealed.